So therefore, again, we have Shane Thala, who is a Principal Design Advisor Māori with Insights and Statistics at Stats New Zealand. And as a thought leader within the organisation, his role is to advance iwi-Māori data aspirations through data system architecture design that enables a mutuality between Te Ao Pākehā and Te Ao Māori to Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Nā reira, Shane, absolute pleasure having you today. E hoa, kia ora rā.
Kia ora koutou te whānau. Yeah, terrible. My mind just went blank, by the way. So what I'll do is I just acknowledge he huria tau o Ngāti Hamo, ko Pūpō te kāinga, ko Apolima te Moana, he wangau hoki a hau o te hapu o ngā Waitangi, o tira I tupu ake au I te taha o te awa o Wanganui. Nō reira mai I reira ngā mihi tihei Māori ora. So kia ora everyone, just by way of introduction, just acknowledging I do have a Māori role. It's interesting for me, I've had Māori roles for the last probably 12, 13 years, but I am Samoan. And so I'm just grateful to everyone too that just have an opportunity to share some ideas, some things that we have done, not just things that we're doing, but also just wanted to acknowledge Manu and Roy Mata, who I saw in there, only because, just really quickly, they're part of whānau that we all work together in our time at Auckland Council, and I kind of feel like a lot of the work that I'm sharing with you was actually part of a practicum really that came out of our time at Auckland Council, but I've been able to apply that in those thinking and that methodology in Crown agencies at the moment, and I'm currently with Stats New Zealand. So what I'll quickly do, because I also want to just let everyone know, I can only share with you 20% of something that is a big kaupapa of what I'll be sharing. So it's really challenging for me and for you. So I just want to let you know, I'm going to be touching on things, but like Albert mentioned when he talks about Te Ao Le Vā and defines the vast space, he says that the way of understanding and analysis is to look at the space between the betweenness. And so I just share that with you right now, because I know in the Pakeha world that we function in, especially with our roles, the focus is always on the what and the how. But what is meant by the vast space of focus on the space between the betweenness is we should always gain first an understanding from the why context, so that we know how to contextualize the things that have happened and the why behind those things and the ecosystem around those things, to inform how we approach the what and the how. And if you think about that, especially from the comments we've heard already, when you work in different agencies, we often don't get that opportunity. Often we're having to focus on the what and the how, which puts us in a reactionary state. So what I'm going to do really quick is, I hope this works. It worked before, so can I just get confirmation that the screen, you can see my presentation?
Ka hore e hoa, it says you have started screen sharing, but it's all pitch black. Anyone else see anything?
Ka hore.
Oh, that there. Is that working?
Ka hore.
Oh, okay. I just tried it again.
Oh, perfect. Third time lucky. I was sweating there if anyone didn't see it.
You were sweating. I was.
But ready to go.
All right. Oh, cool. Okay, well, look, I'll launch into it. I'm going to do part of the Tangata Moana, Tangata Whenua weaving first. But before I do, just want to touch base with everyone around what does it mean to hold a Māori or Moana specialist role in Aotearoa. And often it's about working within a cultural or community context. It's often about working in crisis, working under pressure, being under-resourced, constantly realising your organisation is at odds with the community they're supposed to be serving. I just want to put that out there. Oh, kia ora, Caleb. I want to put that out there and in the hope that is that something that you can relate to in terms of your work if you just reflect over the last 5 years as an example? But also it's a good opportunity to highlight to our non-Māori, non-Pacific colleagues and whānau who might not be aware that these are some of the burdens that we carry if we have a Māori or Pacific specialist role within a kāwanatanga agency. And what it denotes is it speaks to the fact that there's a burden of explanation that falls to us who might be seen as Māori knowledge holders or Pacific knowledge holders, but there's also a burden of explanation, a burden of reaction, and a burden of response that's forced to us as well. And that's partly because we're only allowed to see things through a context of the what and the how, an operational lens, and it's quite reactionary. Also, the worst thing I found that is quite subtle to practitioners is the burden of approval. And sometimes we don't realise that some of the work we're investing in and we're trying to do, we sometimes feel that in order to get it over the line with an ELT or a senior lead team, we're seeking the approval of a kāwanatanga system that doesn't actually understand a te ao marama or pre-colonisation worldview from an Indigenous perspective or from a community context. So I'm putting there just to start so that you can start thinking and connecting to that. I just want to highlight that you're going to hear me talk about institutional system, structure, and process. So when I showed you this, a lot of the work we do is symptomatic of us having to react to a process within an institution or a structural framing that's placed or imposed upon us that doesn't reflect Indigenous. I just want to show you from a structural perspective what that looks like. So this is a good example. There's a lot of work I've been involved in that isn't, that is white stream work, so it's not an Indigenous context, it's not Māori Pacific. And I noticed that when I'm part of a Pakeha portfolio project even, I've noticed that it doesn't have the same burden of explanation required. There's not the same burden of approval. There's not the same burden of response. And what I also found is we're not having to beg, borrow, steal for pūtea to fund our initiatives. And the reason being is because, and I want to show you this, is that a lot of the work I've been involved in the last 15, 20 years in Māori and Pacific areas, I realized that a lot of our work starts at the initiative level. And we get little funding to run an initiative to prove a case. And when that succeeds, like 2 years later, we then get approval of more pūtea, and it's escalated up to now it's a project with multiple initiatives. And then if we're lucky and it survives the project context, it then gets elevated to become a program. I just want to highlight that a lot of the Pakeha programs I'm a part of even now don't have to go through that process. They're the result of a business case at that portfolio level and all the pūteas in place. The burden that placed on Māori Pacific projects I've been on is that by the time we've achieved the initiative and gone through the project, I realised we've lost half our Māori staff. And the reason being is because they've been burnt out by that process. And if we're lucky enough to get it to program, which usually results in a general manager role afforded into a structure, we're still having to push for appropriated budget approval up to that portfolio level. So I just want to highlight that although we're used to dealing and identifying the symptoms, I want to highlight that if you look at the structure layout, it doesn't, and it's not emotive either, that structure layout, because if anybody that starts at initiative level is going to experience those burdens. Now, this is a result of a Pakeha system that we're all a part of, especially if we're kāwanatanga and work in that space. But often, a lot of times when we're trying to incorporate, or in the past when I've tried to incorporate te ao Māori, or mainly te ao Māori approaches into the system structure process, it's resulted in that system structure process being able to commandeer the te ao marama context of it and reframe it to its own benefits. And what I see is that we achieve some Māori outcomes and outputs, but the system lens never changed. And hence, I like what I heard in the commentary. Some of those comments I heard prior to this kōrero, I remember hearing that 25 years ago, and even 18 years ago, and even in 2010. And so what it shows me is for all the amazing work that we have been able to pull off, the same symptoms are out and about in our society. It's like the system hasn't moved. And when I think about the system, that system lens, that's not us. So what I want to start with now is just highlight that one of the challenges we have is that the system structure process has commandeered our own story narrative sometimes in terms of a wayfinding or the journey of getting here. So I just want to start with this. For example, if I look at Voyagers, Navigators, Wayfinders, which I think some of you are quite familiar with, especially from Rere Makeha and Hoturoa Kerr and Bernard Makuari. This is what Hoturoa shows as a reflection of what came from our education system, reflecting that when Māori tupuna arrived in Aotearoa, this is how it looked. It was such a bedraggled experience of navigating the Pacific to come through to Aotearoa. I would hazard a guess that this is more an experience that Captain Cook and their crews experienced, not knowing how to feed and thrive off living at sea, because remember they had to wait till landfall to get their kai, and also when you think of scurvy. So this is an example of what it means to commandeer the story sovereignty of a people and its impact on our system structure lenses. And so what I want to touch on is when you look at the current practices of wakahaurua and all that we've learned from that celestial navigation, what we've seen is that the kōrero, when story sovereignty is retained by our indigenous lines in that whakapapa, what it results in is a completely alien and different story of the fact that our people thrived and strived, and Māori and tupuna didn't arrive in Aotearoa necessarily by accident or bedraggled, but arrived from a position of strength, knowledge, and mātauranga. And so I'll move on really quick from this one. So what I'm really highlighting is that in the work that all of us will get to do, it's about the lens you see things through. But it might not necessarily be about the lens that you and I see things through. It might be about the lens that our institutions need to see things through. And so I'm saying here the lens you see through, quite often the lens that we're allowed to see things through has been heavily constrained by that Pakeha context and that one-dimensional approach, which doesn't reflect an indigenous way of thinking or seeing and actualizing. As a Samoan, that's known as Te Ao Lewa or the Va space. When I work with different tohunga, they're always often referring to the Te Ao Marama realm space, which is a four-dimensional context. The challenge we all have is that if we work in a kāwanatanga or a Pākehā context, it's always one-dimensional. It doesn't know anything else. So I put here Te Whamamau. So Te Whamamau is a Samoan context of to look beyond the mountain, to look beyond the next hill. Often a lot of the work I've done in Crown agencies and in agencies, and even when I've worked with communities and groups, often a lot of the work we're doing is we're not even allowed to look at the mountain. We're looking at the road that leads to that mountain. And so that's why this is here. I just want to highlight the first thing we should look at trying to address from our organisations is it is about the lenses that we see through. And just to let you know, for me, in the last 3 years as a practitioner, I no longer seek permission from my institution to determine which lens I get to use. Caleb is from Stats New Zealand. I just got a surprise, Caleb, to see you're on the kōrero here. Caleb's probably aware of some of those things. What I'm really grateful for is that the Stats New Zealand has allowed me to now bring that. But if I never came with a different lens to test those lines, I probably would still be doing the same things I've been allowed to do in the last 10 years. And just touching on that Tangata Whenua, Tangata Moana, I like this when I was out at the occupation at Iho Mātao when that was on. I saw this and I took a photo of it for that reason. Iho Mātao has been described as a Māori proto-city, the area offering an unbroken record of occupation and agricultural production by Tangata Whenua until the confiscation of the land in the 1860s. And my point was, you can say this is the place where Polynesians became Māori, and there were maybe 30,000 people living between Mangere and Wiri. And that's from Graham Campbell, Department of Conservation. Just want you to think about that a little bit. That's a space that's not often comfortable for us to move into. But I want to build onto that further before I really unpack kaupapa Polynesia. So just based on that kōrero here, I'm reminding of a context, the Te Ao Marama context, through Manuka Hinari, Professor when he talks about economies of mana and economies of well-being, that four-dimensional realm space he speaks of actually denotes a mana tupuna, mana tangata, mana tamariki context. What I like about that is when I look at the mana tupuna context, was Manuka referring just to tupuna from the time that Māori arrived in Aotearoa to date? Or is tupuna a context that goes beyond? And so for me, from a realm space, it goes beyond. And that's what this reflects. So what I want to show you from this, these two maps is that often we, from a Tangata Whenua, Tangata Moana context, we often talk about how the Moana is what connects us. But that assumes, that makes the assumption, it's a one-dimensional context that assumes that we are not already connected. And so what I like about this map on the left is that when you make the Moana invisible and you can see the whenua below, what you'll notice is that the Samoa, Tonga and Fiji and Aotearoa are on one solid whenua land mass. So what I'm highlighting here, and it's a paradigm shift for us as Tangata Whenua, us as Tangata Moana and Tangata Whenua, is that the Moana is not necessarily what connects us. We're already connected. The blood of my tupuna in Whaleasi'u in Sava'i, Puapua, Samoa, is already mixed in the land with the blood of my wife's tupuna, Tangata Whenua here in Aotearoa. So there's a whakapapa in the DNA as well that kind of links. But with the context is how does that link in today's context when we're thinking of a one-dimensional construct and in a kawanatanga perspective. So just leaping forward, going forward, this is a multi-dimensional approach layers. Now, this might be clunky, but I had to develop this because my role is to work within and between Te Ao Pākehā, Te Ao Māori, and Te Ao Marama. When I say Te Ao Marama, I'm actually referring to the Māori way of seeing, being, and actualizing prior to colonization. It's a realm space. And beyond that is Te Ao Lewa. My role is not mandated as a Tangata Moana Pacific role. I have a Māori role. So what I'm going to share with you with this multi-dimensional approach layers is I was just highlighting to my agency that I work for that the one-dimensional construct is never going to be a source of solutions for how we work and navigate between Tangata Whenua and Tangata Moana because it's based on a competitive model. And, you know, like Manu mentioned before, is over the last 20, 30 years, that construct has pitted Tangata Whenua, Tangata Moana against each other in a bid for resources. And that's because we were using a one-dimensional lens handed to us from the Kāwanatanga. What I'm highlighting here is what's a thing, it's based on kaupapa Polynesia, which I was given as a kōrero from Professor Manuka Hinari. What he speaks of is one of the things he starts saying, but also Ririata Mākiha and Hoturo Kū say the same thing. What they're saying is, for Tangata Moana people to be in Aotearoa, they did not require and do not require a treaty. Because what they're saying is, based on Te Ao Lewa, is that although they are in the Pacific, they are of the Pacific, same as Tangata Whenua Māori. What they highlight is that the difference with Pākehā when they came here is although they're in the Pacific, they are not of the Pacific. Their whakapapa lines come from, that's not to denote any lessening. It's just saying that there's a different kind of whakapapa context. And so what they go on to say is he talks about the terms tangata whenua tauiwi are actually not Māori concepts. The kaupapa Polynesia that predate Aotearoa, predate back to over 1900 years from Tangata Moana. And so when you think of those contexts and those layers, these are things that we've never been able to address, understand, or unpack and explore in conversations to then inform how we frame how, in a Kāwanatanga perspective, Tangata Whenua, Tangata Moana work together. But what he highlights is that under Tangata Whenua, Tangata Moana, that kaupapa denotes, it's a tikanga actually throughout Polynesia, is he's saying that when Māori, if Māori are in Aotearoa, it switches. In Samoa, sorry, it switches for me, where I'm Tangata Whenua. So I therefore take on the obligations of Tangata Whenua and addressing, taking care of the cultural, spiritual, welfare needs of our whanaunga who are in Samoa from Aotearoa. But what they're highlighting too is that when you're tauiwi over there, you then take on the interests and aspirations as part of your whakamana too, to your cousins in that place. So when I pivot it back to here, for all of us in Tangata Moana Pacific who migrated here as a result of the BIL scheme of the Crown, when we're here, we have an obligation as tauiwi of Tangata Moana to awhi tautoko support the interests of our Tangata Whenua whanaunga. What it also highlights is that the Tangata Whenua relationship back to Tangata Moana is one of alignment in terms of the manakitanga to us as cousins. So that's the context that was given. What he also highlighted is that it's not a competitive advantage, it's a comparative relationship between the two that is different to the Tiriti one. However, Article 1 of the treaty is really important for Pacific because it's the thing that legitimizes, legalizes our presence here through citizenship or residency. But what I'm highlighting here is that that context to fit in a kāwanatanga perspective system, structure process, can only be done if we're allowed to apply a multi-layered, multifaceted, multi-dimensional approach to how we design that in. And that's the struggle that agencies have in addressing that. At Stats, we were able to address that and see what's come from that, but I won't talk about that here. And a good example of that today is found when you look at our cultural relevance in terms of Pacifica Futures for Pacific communities. I think the majority of us actually think Pacifica Futures is funded through Pacific Vote in Parliament, that it's funded through the Ministry of Pacific Peoples. What's interesting is that it's not. Pacifica Futures is funded through Te Pone Kōkiri and through the Māori vote line in Cabinet. And that's really important because what that does is it demonstrates the reality and functionality of that relationship between Tangata Whenua, Tangata Moana Tauiwi, the tuakana teina context that often different tūhunga and kaumātua speak of, the mātauranga Moana, mātauranga Māori. So that's another thing I like about what Rereata and Hotu talk about, is they speak about when Tangata Whenua tūpuna arrived from the Moana into Aotearoa, it was mātauranga Moana that was used to get them here, to navigate. And the maramataka that they tried to apply from it here in Aotearoa all of a sudden didn't work because it was based on a mātauranga from another part of the world. But what was highlighted is the process with tūhunga that was used to develop mātauranga Māori, mātauranga for Aotearoa, that then the maramataka resulted in. So I leave that with you as an example that if you look at mana tupuna, there are processes of analytics, research, data capture and observation that we can use to frame our way forward from a position of strength when it comes to a divergence lens. So based on that, and I need to hurry now, but I just want to let you know, these models that I'm going to be sharing with you really quickly, they're not theory models, they're based on practice because that's actually what we developed and used to shift the system lens. And it's quite fascinating what we found. Once we shifted the burdens over to Article 1, to the kāwanatanga, away from us, it was fascinating how I wasn't getting burnt out to push things. And it turned from a push strategy to a pull strategy. So I'll touch on this really lightly. As an example, if you look at the current data system, and the thing about Stats New Zealand is we're actually the institution of institutions because we provide the data statistical analysis methodologies that are used and adopted as a general evidence base, not just in agencies, but also research for universities. So I just want to highlight as an example, when I look at the current data system, and it's just my opinion, so I'll just say it's just my opinion, the current data system was never designed to actually pull off the aspirations of iwi-Māori or Pacific that we're trying to place on it. It's a real struggle for it to do it. And the reason I say that is because if you look at the current state data system, it's been framed by the past state, which is the 1975 Act. That Act has the word Māori appearing in it 0 times. Te Tiriti o Waitangi appears in that Act 0 times. So that gives you an example. What I want to highlight is we have a new act that has been framed according to the articles of the treaty, not the principles, the articles. Really black and white. What that's done is created a new future state that has a whole different implications of mana for our treaty partners, and you'll see that later on. What I want to highlight from the slide, though, is that quite often a lot of the work that we're doing is focusing only on the current state to influence the future state. The challenge we have, actually I'll leave it for the next slide, and it's really hard because a lot of the aims we have are in the future state, but we don't get to influence the current system structure process in the current state to give effect to those things. And so if anyone's interested in the wider whakaaro around that slide, you can hit me up afterwards and I can unpack it further. But for time, I'm going to go through really quick. So just to let you know, one of the things that was important for us was identifying system structure process within our institution. And the thing that really shocked me over the last 3 to 4 years was realizing a lot of the work I've been involved in going back 20 years in terms of Māori and Pacific, it was all only impacting that process. And a lot of the cool stuff I had happen, and I'll give you a case in point. If I look at Pacific, budget appropriation for Pacific engagement from 1998 to 2008 was well in excess of in the millions over that time. And it's interesting because it gave birth to a lot of amazing initiatives and the Samoan language curriculum, different Pacific language curriculums, different Pacific education strategy within Ministry of Education. As a result of all this talanoa, consultation engagement. 2008, we had a change of government. And overnight, all those amazing programs disappeared over the next 3 to 4 months. And how much consultation community engagement do you think happened in order to enable that to occur? Nothing. And the reason it happened is because they got rid of the Pacific vote line, which is the budget appropriation in Parliament. That's all they did, was just remove that. That killed all the funding programs and all the agency system structure process. A lot of people didn't even realize until they went for the bid the following financial year, and then we're told you did all the business case, but there's actually no putia in there. So that highlights what happens with all the great work we do in process. How do we convert that to have an impact at the system lens? So the importance of this is we use this to take the lived experience, voice connotations of our community leaders and that we're kept in process, and we weaponized it and used it to target a reframing of the system lens at the top within our institutions. What resulted in a very short time was something completely alien to what we'd seen before. But I'll also go on to say, when you reframe a system lens, if you can pull that off, and it's a different lens thing. And the system lens is all about how does your agency see Māori or Pacific. So in my case, when I looked at how my agency saw, but even every other agency I work for, how we see Pacific communities or Māori treaty partners is we see them through a demographic lens, not through a relational construct or a four-dimensional lens. When you see them through a demographic lens, you don't actually know Māori. So we're making design development decisions based on a context with an absence of a Māori context, a Māori way of seeing, being, and actualizing up at that system level. But I'll just let you know, we based it on mana tupuna, mana tangata, mana tamariki at all three structures. And what it did is it armed us with the right terminology and kupu to actually address the system structure process issues. So, and I'm not saying we've got it right yet, it's still really in its infancy, but we've seen some new things. So what I want to highlight is if you can reframe the system lens from it's either this or that, you don't get a choice, right? And it's always a Pakeha tanga construct, to and actually then bring in our treaty partners to work with us to reframe the way forward to the future state so that they can lead change, not react to it. That will automatically result in a recalibration of the system, of the institutional structure. And then I don't have to worry about the processes because they will set themselves to the system structure part. But often a lot of work we do in Māori Pacific only is in that process space, even though we've got iwi-Māori iwi leaders at the governance table. But the kaupapa they get to address is always anchored in implementation down at that process. So just quickly on this quote, we cannot continue to bring in leaders and colleagues of colour into a profession and hope to narrow the glaring racial and ethnic gaps in our ranks while trying simultaneously to keep all of our structures, systems and approaches exactly the same as they have always been. And so I like that quote from Dr. Adrienne Lim. She's Native American Tribal Reservation in the United States, because it reflects what we just covered in that slide, is that we even if we populated a lot of our staff with Māori and Pacific staff and expertise, if the system structure doesn't change, we'll still be just focusing on engagement type work. I'm going to finish on these two slides, but I want to put the invitation out for people to reach out. The reason we developed these next two slides was to help us navigate and shift the thinking of our organisation. But I won't go into too much detail, except to say, when I look at the application of the Articles of the Treaty, Article 1 breaches the kāwanatanga. That's resulted in the type of coloniality today that has brought about that harm and that disempowerment of our treaty partners. But the reactionary counters is the decolonisation, decoloniality space. A lot of the work I do with Māori data sovereignty under Articles 2 and 3 is in that space at the moment. But the work that I'm actually building for the future state is in the post-colonial context. And that represents our Article 1 aspirations as a kāwanatanga agency, to look at what would it have been look like if we had not failed to meet our Article 1 obligations. And for starters, here's a challenge. The majority of our agency organisations don't actually understand the Articles of the Treaty. They also don't understand what our obligations are as a kāwanatanga under Article 1. So I'll simplify it like this. The obligation for Stats New Zealand and other agencies and the Crown in Article 1 is to protect the rights and interests of iwi-Māori. So what's been fascinating is that's the nature of the breach, is that for 183 years, it's been Article 2 and 3 that have carried the burden of trying to protect their rights and interests. That burden actually belongs to us under Article 1. So imagine if over 183 years we had met our obligations under Article 1. Do you think that Māori data sovereignty would be the type of issue and challenge that it is today? Or would it have already been built into the system? So that, I won't go into any further on that. But it also required that we develop the constitutional mandate sequence for our agency to understand. And the reason I had to do this with the articles is we've spent so long focusing on the principles which don't do anything. We've talked about the treaty without addressing the articles, but with the articles are black and white. So what I want to highlight, there are 4 articles, I only focus on 3, but what we've done in the past is we've treated the treaty like a smorgasbord. We've gone and selected what we wanted. So we've only ever focused on Article 3 and 4, if anything. And we do that because 1 and 2 is so difficult. And so that's what I'm saying, is this sequence is showing is that the importance of focusing on Article 1, Article 2 getting that right first. There's a context we found fall out of it, whānau mātara, which we complete, has been missed even in the Māori data sovereignty context at the moment. So we're trying to address that from our perspective. And this is how we've applied it in our design thinking for our system structure process in stats. So the approach we're looking to do, especially for the future state system, is under Article 1 and 2, we are looking to put Te Ao Māori Article 2 and 3 at the centre core of our system lens design thinking, and the Pākehā Article 1 will be scaffolded around it. That way, iwi-Māori are no longer a tack on or a stretch exercise, for us. And also, we're not trying to incorporate Te Ao Māori into our system structure process. We want them woven in so that our institutional system structure process can align towards Te Ao Marama as a space. Whereas right now, what we're doing is we're picking and choosing what we want out of Te Ao Māori, and we're brownifying our system lens, but the application isn't actually enabling a mana context of Māori from Article 1, 2, and 3. What that results in, though, that doesn't denigrate a multicultural context. What this slide shows you is that by getting Article 1 and 2 together right, it enables us together as treaty partners between 1 and 2 to then meet the aspirations, manakitanga, and needs of all other nations that come to Aotearoa off the back of a bicultural treaty context, the mutuality part. So our multiculturalism approach in New Zealand, Aotearoa, is different to everywhere else, because within ours we have the treaty bicultural context is at the centre core to enable a multicultural approach. There's lots I could say on that, so I won't. I'll finish on these. this is how we've applied it when it's come to, if you're probably familiar with this process, a lot of the community engagement work that used to happen back in 2000 onwards, that's been improved because of co-design methodology, but a lot of that work happened at implementation is where we used to engage with Māori, iwi hapu, mata waka tauta here. What you'll see here is when because we've applied the articles, we now do concept development with iwi hapu back here under Article 2. You'll see that under Article 3, for mata waka tauta here context, we bring them in at project planning stage. Now, I just want to let you know, this isn't a theory practice, so there's lots of questions I would hope you have around this slide. I can give you the ecosystem around how this was born and how we used it with the 19 mana whenua that we have in Aotearoa to enable some major platforms. Finally, treaties are not made to be settled, treaties are made to be honoured. Moana Jackson. As a public servant, at the heart of it for me, I'm really proud to be a public servant for those reasons. I also want to own the negative things that have happened in the past as a public servant because of what we have or haven't done, but I'm also determined about a new future that allows us to meet the aspirations of what it means in terms of civics, democracy, and the public service. Yeah, and sorry I didn't go into the Masonjuri mahi, but I'll send that out so you can see how we've designed it using his methodology to create the right spaces to bring our treaty partners in so they can shape the future state with us. And we're currently doing that at the moment with the federated data ecosystem that we're currently on. So that's a lot to throw out there. Just want to let you know that's 20% really of an approach. And I want to leave that with you as my offering contribution to this, to the community of practice, because I've really enjoyed the sessions here. But I'll close that off there and I'll throw it back to Donna. But that's my offering to you. And just bear in mind too, I don't see myself as an expert, more as a practitioner in space, because I'm not an academic or an intellectual. But I really like to just constantly test out our stuff and learn, and then look at what works and just apply it. So I'll leave that with you. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Shane, no mata te whawhai, such a pleasure. As Shane mentioned before, this is only 20% of his kōrero. Normally this is 3 to 4 hours in workshop, but even that 20% has been absolutely amazing. Again, for Practice Foundations, whānau to spark the thinking and allow us, which we'll do shortly, is to jump into groups and have that talanoa with like-minded people and start to grapple and have those conversations about these mite kaupapa. But again, what Shane has shared there are live examples and practices of holding on to those different weaves, and you can hear the complexities within the beautiful sharing. Tangata Tiriti, Tangata Whenua, Tangata Pasifika, Tangata Tiriti, while also embedding that Tiriti-led approach within a Crown agency or within that 20-minute kōrero. But then again, we get to hand over the koha to koha atu back to our whānau that comes and joined us today. So very shortly, we're going to jump into our second breakout session. And again, this is where you're allowed to just to have that talanoa and kōrero on the back of Shane's awesome kōrero. And the provocation will be dropped into our chat very shortly. Jumping into your groups is to think about what are some of the ways you or we could start influencing the institutional system to an and context of thinking and design in our work. So again, how do we achieve or start to go about getting those and conversations? So what Shane did, he did and with 3 different perspectives, and actually there was a 4th dimension of the bar space and the in-between spaces. So kia ora Lee, look forward to the talanoa that you all have, and we'll see you soon. What I really liked was Shane presented us, for me, he presented us a finished end product with his presentation. We got to see, oh, that's nice, cool, there's that framework, he weaved that together. And I was going, what wasn't mentioned was the absolute mess to actually get to the end state. And that's why I had to do a mihi out to the him, was understanding all, and use will all understand being in the same field and mihi together, regardless where you are, all these complexities in some way or another is sitting within the mihi that you do. How do you weave all these complex layers together? Who do you talk to? Who out there has a practice, and who do you listen to weave this? Again, weave it. what Shane has done in a subtlety, again, not only has he given us an end product, and what happens is he's woven 4 different spaces together to sit as a future framework in terms of where Stats New Zealand are heading to. And that was the architect he shared with us. So it's really interesting, and I'm quite excited in terms of looking at the future state of where they're heading into. Again, those subtle layers of weaving the 4 different lenses across all the work they're doing. So holding on to those 4 layers, as well as ensuring that they're holding on to that mana motuhake in terms of the story sovereignty. So it's keeping that lineage and then adding to those complexities and the weaves in terms of heading towards solutions or carrying on the conversations together and opening up with all those layers. So in saying that, within the short time we still have plenty of time e te whānau. So in saying that, not only am I going to extend the invitation to share what happened in your what happened to come out in your breakout session, but I'm actually going to open up, and we're going to be on fire heading out today, and we're going to open up for Q&A as well. So I'm sure there's some burning partai that you have. And I also, for Shane to keep a note, there were some partai that were dropped into the chat. So again, unmute, share your partai, share your thoughts, or drop into chat, and me and Shane will both keep an eye and do our best with the time that we have left to answer any questions or respond if you like. So kia ora rei te whānau, the floor is open to share.
Oh. Go. Kia ora everyone. I just have a question for Shane. Just touching on what Donna was saying about, presenting this in outcome, which is really awesome. But what did it take to get to that point? Like, who did you talk to? Who did you have to influence, or what did you have to influence? What were the steps that it took to get to that change?
Oh, kia ora, yeah, it's if I look at it at a linear pathway, it's kind of like you end up having a list and you're targeting an internal structure, right? You're targeting an ELT, an SL, like executive lead team or a deputy chief executive. You're looking at all that system mapping approach and who do you need to influence. And but one of the things I had to do first was I spent 4 months just infiltrating the whole system, the whole organization. And I had to work out role, form, function, what is the purpose, and I had to analyze the legislative act to understand the source of our gaps and disempowerment. And once I did that, I was able to then look at, when I look at the whole institutional system structure process, I started looking at who are the people who hold the pen in the organization. And it wasn't always deputy chief executives. It wasn't always general managers of senior lead teams. But once I found the pen holder who holds the pen around the development, codification, design, and the why of the actual data architecture. Now, in my case, it might be data architecture, but in your case, it's actually whatever determines and states. It's your form of compliance and conformance to whatever. So once I found that, I shortlisted it down to my first 4 that I needed to build relationships of trust with. And look, to do that, I had to make sure I could deliver some short run wins so that they could see that I'm not just a talk fest person, I'm not just some guy full of ideas. But once we were able to land stuff that gave them access to different things, it then enabled me to be able to shift their thinking. There's a term that was being used, one of my colleagues was saying, oh mate, you're infecting thinking, that's what's happening. And that's how she said it. And I thought about it, I thought, well, actually, yeah. So what I'm saying is, if we can't identify that system structure process and the things that will enable not just the transformational shift, but the transitional shifts from an operating model to a future state operating model, you're not in a position to negotiate the new terms of engagement, the type of kōrero that needs to be happening to allow them and enable those people who hold the pen to be able to see an and approach, but also to see the potential that comes from addressing things from a non-Western perspective or a non-Western view. So, you know, I don't want to scare people off, but I'll just to let you know, I've only been at Stats for 2+ years, 2 years, 3 or 4 months. But because, and I still had to deliver my day job. But what I found is I didn't want to just deliver the BAU stuff, right? And because what I've always said at Stats is, hey, look, I'm responsible to you to deliver these things, A, B, C. But you need to remember that I'm actually accountable to Māoridom, because in order to pull those things off, I need to have a te ao marama context relationship with these people, where it's not just about the what and the how, it's about a 100-year aspiration, you know. And so what I'm saying is, I'm not Māori, but my role is to enact and enable the right spaces to allow iwi-Māori to have that reflected in a way that we can reframe our system lens. Because remember how I say, if I look at our existing agencies, none of those agencies have been designed with iwi-Māori or our treaty partners at the centre core. And so that's something that I had to do, is I found if I was just going to answer this and answer that, that's coming from the source of mamai and trauma to our people, to Māori in Pacific anyway. But I needed to go off the reservation, come up with a thing, and then look at how do I backcast that to the right people. And you know what's crazy is it's worked. And like in Stats, and it's going to be different to every other agency, but I know that if I go to any other agency, I'll do the same thing. And what it is by targeting these key people who are of repute across overseas, even because they adopted it and started reframing the system lens that way, when the other ones that have mana that, when they push it up to senior lead team, it gets approval. Then when it got pushed to the ELT, it got buy-in. And that's when I realized, man, that didn't take me 5 years like it normally does, and leave me burnt out and traumatized. It's because the burden shifted. And so, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but when you're saying that, is it can be as long and as short as you want it to be. The challenge is if you're going to be subject to the existing lens, I could tell you it's going to be 25 years, because that's what Mason Jury says. But if you can alter and shift and do those, so that's hard, because it requires us as practitioners to not just be about engagement, to not just be about representing and reflection. It requires us to learn everything there is to know about the existing kawana Pakeha system, structure, process, and learn how to weaponize that to be a benefit for the people you're accountable to. And to be honest, like I'm saying, I've got no quals, I've got no qualifications. I'm not kidding. I don't have degrees or nothing. I got nothing from School C. But what's qualified me to do this work is mana tupuna, mana tangata, mana tamariki. Is that all the experiences of knowing how to behave for alo in the right spaces, the respect, and building relationships on that. All of a sudden, I've been given the right people who are qualified to do that stuff. So I don't know if that's a BAU practice that we all get to approach, but all I'm saying is, I don't know that I'm the expert to help guide you on how to navigate an existing system, to do things in a way that the system's happy with and will approve. I don't know if I can do that, but I can tell you that I know how to pull it off so that you create the right pain points, and all of a sudden the whole system structure is trying to change. And part of that pain point for me was Section 14 of the Data and Statistics Act 2022. If that act didn't change and wasn't able to put the terminology and the wording in there, I probably would last another 4 months and I'll be gone. But that's not what's happened. And a good KPI of that for me is that I went to resign from Stats because I'm moving to Australia because of my grandkids. And what was interesting is they've said, hey, can we create a new role for you so you can continue the same work in the future state architecture and ecosystem, but from Australia? And for Stats, that's a big ask, because you're not allowed to access a lot of our data architecture from overseas, but they've done that. And so that to me shows that by operating in a non-conformist way, if you can get the right elements at the right level and at the right sequence and have it backed by legislation, man, they'll move mountains to try and achieve the new treaty outcomes we've developed based on the articles of the treaty, not the principles. I'm not saying the principles are wrong. What I'm saying is, let's focus on the articles first, and then let the principles of the treaty be a result of enacting those articles. Because if you don't do that, man, we can talk principles for Africa. It doesn't result in a system lens change. I've never seen a system lens change in 20 plus years from talking about the principles of the treaty. So yeah.
Oh, kia ora, Shane. And oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, whānau, but we're out of time and just get into the meaty stuff. But do not despair, whānau, what I love. First and foremost, Shane, like he has shared, he's going to be sharing these slides because he knows there's going to be a lot of tātai and questions that you may have. So be aware, we'll share those and there'll be the opportunity to reconnect with Shane. And also he's joining us at our hui taumata. We were talking about Tiriti-centric mātauranga informed Aotearoa. So he'll be there so we can continue this kōrero, which is really awesome. And also thank you, Fiona, for your koha about the split voting and all the comments in the chat that we did keep an eye on. Thank you for sharing. And e te whānau again. If it wasn't for you, we wouldn't have been able to have this amazing, robust kōrero. Kei te tino mihi atu au ki a koutou katoa. And again, the link is in the chat from before. So again, if you look forward, if you are able to join us at a hui taumata at the end of the month, because what a prelude by hearing from Shane. And saying that e te whānau tukuna te inei kōrero katoa I runga I ngā ararau o tāpiri kia rere katu kātou.